Welcome to the Inspiring Heights podcast. I'm your host, Vanessa Kaiser, and I am so excited to be here with you today. Inspiring Heights exists to walk alongside you as we learn to create healthy rhythms, flourish in our faith, and be inspired where our feet are. We're honored that you're with us today. We can't wait. Let's get started. In episode 28, our sweet friends Katie and Jesse joined us for the second part of our two-part series, Seasons of Life. Our friend Katie grew up in Pennsylvania and got her undergrad degree from Minnesota State University. She loves to play piano as well as give piano lessons. And Jesse grew up in Minnesota and received his undergrad degree from Minnesota State, his graduate degree from Emmanuel Christian Seminary, and is currently working on his doctorate of ministry from Gordon Conwell Theology Seminary. He is the pastor at First Baptist Church in George, Iowa. Jesse and Katie have 3 wonderful kids, 2 cute dogs, and a fluffy bunny. Ben also joined me in this episode, and we got to have a wonderful conversation with Jesse and Katie about marriage. We talked about our love stories, premarital counseling, conflict resolution, keeping Christ at the center of our relationships, and a whole host of other things. I think you're really going to enjoy this talk. Well, thank you so much for being willing to be on the show with us, and we're excited to chat with you. We just started, this will be the second episode in our Seasons of Life series, and so we're going to focus our conversation today specifically around marriage. And but before we dive in too deep, can you just tell our listeners how we know each other? You guys know Ben better than me, so I'll let you tell that piece of this story. Can tell some listeners some secrets about him.
Well, Ben and I met at church, and he was I was going to say the resident tech guy, but but no, he figured out all the lights and the live stream, and but more than that, I think we just had kind of a discipling relationship, and he and I and who else was it? Cody. We had all kind of
Cody and the rest of the worship team.
Yeah, for sure. So, and then Ben was one of the worship leaders at the church. Yeah, it came to like on Sunday mornings where would be getting ready for worship and something would go wrong, and I'd be like, "Where's Ben? He knows the answers." And if he didn't, then that meant I had to, and that was a scary thing.
I think that about most things, actually.
Yeah.
He can figure that out for sure. That's funny. Cool. So tell us your guys' love story. Like, how did you meet? How did that all unfold?
Yeah, so we met in college. We were both music majors there, and so we had a couple classes together, and just on the classes we just gradually got to know each other, talked, and then he asked me out, and might have taken a few times, but I did say
quite
yes.
A few times. New inventive ways to say no.
But we got to know each other, and then
you had a painted door once. It got to the point where I was like, I just don't think that we're going to be, we're going to be together, even though I was sure that she was the one. I remember I had a phone call with my brother, and I'm just like, man, if she would just recognize this, it'd be so much better, But then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to ask her out one last time and just kind of close the book on this, And so I go up to her and I ask her out, fully expecting her to say no, and she says yes. In fact, it took me so by surprise that I didn't even know what we were going to do. So I made it up on the spot. I'm like, let's see, would Tuesday work at 7:00? I was hoping that it didn't work then, so I was gonna have to call in sick or something. But yeah, so we went out on our first date, and the rest was history, I guess.
That's awesome. How long did you guys date before you got married?
I think it was about 10 months.
Mm-hmm.
Not quite a year.
Okay.
Dated for 3, then we got engaged, but it was a little bit longer engagement. Sure. Well, not long, not 7-8 months. So.
Okay. Yeah, very good.
Yep.
Yeah, we had a short dating engagement cycle. We met, dated, were engaged, and married in a year.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. Once you know, right?
Right.
It is so true. When I was single, I was like, I don't know if that's true or not. But then it was very true for us, I feel like.
Yeah, for sure.
So, premarital counseling. I've been on a high horse about this since I was a young pup. What is your posture on premarital counseling? Did you guys do it? You're a pastor now, Jesse, right? Like, are you a big believer in it? Not so much. Tell us about that.
Yes, we did premarital counseling, and I think it's kind of, for the most part, as helpful as it can be. But until you're kind of in those situations, whatever it may be, it's hard to apply it to your life and really live it out. Hard to always remember the information when you actually need it.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm a fan of premarital counseling if it's done right. With our premarital counseling, we talked about a lot of different things. I think we watched a few like DVDs and stuff, and heard like some lectures about marriage. So that was helpful to engage a topic or engage a conversation. Well, and it's also helpful to talk about certain things before you get into like a conflict, because when you're gonna try to figure out how you're going to engage an issue in the future and you're in the midst of that conflict, then it's like uber tough. So if you can at least try to like talk about it a little bit beforehand, that's good. But again, like before you get married, you're just thinking like everything's going to be peaches and roses, right? You don't really have the understanding of what marriage is like until afterwards. So it's both like helpful and not helpful at the same time. The pastor that we did premarital counseling with, though, at one point he's like, I don't think I can marry you guys. He's like, I think you're just not ready to get married. I don't think you're going to stay together that long.
Really?
Yeah. And so, but he's like, you know what? I'm going to talk to another pastor on staff here and we'll see. And then that pastor comes in and he's like, don't worry, guys, you're going to get married. We don't have that authority or that say so in your marriage or in your situation. So he kind of like cleared that obstacle. So yeah, for myself as a pastor, I think premarital counseling is good because it lets you kind of engage in conversations. And I think couples get as much out of it as they kind of put into it, But yeah, I always come to them and being like, hey, this isn't a time where I'm going to say whether or not I'm going to marry you or not. You don't have to prove your love to me. You don't have to prove your relationship to me. My goal is just to kind of facilitate a conversation and try to get you to think of things that maybe you haven't thought of before, like we'll be like, hey, finances, how are you going to construct your budget? Are you going to have separate banking accounts? Are you going to have a joint one? Are you going to have a joint one with separate individual accounts? And just facilitate those conversations because sometimes people just don't think of all the things. And so in that way, I think premarital counseling is helpful. That's basically what I do with it.
Yeah. I think that's basically what we went through. Is it was just like facilitating conversations and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And also to kind of like point people to the marriage passages in the Bible, because before you actually encounter something in life, you don't always grab a hold of those passages, So like I talked to one couple once, I'm like, hey, what are some of the marriage passages you're familiar with? They're like, I don't know. I don't know any of them. And, they weren't in that stage of life yet. And so I'm like, well, let's just look at what the Bible specifically says. And that way they can kind of go back to it or at least have encountered it once before they got married.
Yeah. I would say for me, there was kind of two things that really stuck out about premarital counseling. So one was our pastor, the way that he facilitated it, we looked a lot at how our parents did things.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to talk about like each other's understanding of how we thought each other's parents probably did things.
Okay.
Like we had quizzes that we did. Mm-hmm. Every week. And that was so insightful because for Ben and I, our strongest influencers in our life up to the point of getting married were our parents. And so much of our like habits or like thought process was born from their influence. Mm-hmm. And to understand what that influence looked like a little deeper than we had been able to facilitate in just our normal conversations leading up to that was really, really helpful. I think it helped us ward off some of the like, we're getting up at 5 a.m. on Saturday morning to go grocery shopping conversations.
Yeah. Well, and I also, like, it sparked conversation about that, but also, like, gave us a deeper understanding of, like, well, like, the influence that our parents had over, like, us. Like, there were things that I learned about kind of my relationship with my parents that never really thought about before.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we each come to marriage with our own, I call it our own normal. And that's from what we grew up with. And now when you get married, you have to construct your whole new normal. So you want to take the best of what from both sides, be like, how can we incorporate this? And then what do we want to make up new and just do for ourselves,
The second thing that I really loved about marriage counseling is I felt like it broke down some of the barriers of the fear of sitting in someone else's space and having hard conversations, right? So obviously premarital counseling is different than like marriage counseling. It's just a different situation.
Mm-hmm.
But after we sat in Pastor Tom's office and like started these conversations, I walked away from that feeling like if there comes a time in our marriage where we need counseling, I'm not quite as fearful as I was, because now at least I have a taste of what it could look like.
Yeah.
You talked about pointing people to marriage scripture. So I want to look at Ephesians 5:25 through 33, which is a fairly common marriage passage that we talk about. And Ben, will you read that for us?
Yeah. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband.
I just want to hear your guys' perspective on how that plays out in married life, like in a very practical way.
Yeah, I think just really living that out can be just, not looking to your own interests, but looking to the other person's, putting them first, and, instead of just taking care of yourself and your own needs, but just thinking about what's best for the other person. And I always like to kind of think of it too with Philippians 2:5-11, how in your relationships with one another, should have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, just, humbling yourself and just making sure to put that other person first.
Yeah, just practically, it's just putting Christ at, the center of your relationship. So if you've gotten through a week or even a day, but a week of interacting with each other without having, outside of church, been in the word together or in prayer together or something, then you need to recheck where Christ is at in your relationship. I mean, just practically just get together and read the Bible together and pray, the basics that we tend to forget about.
For sure. I have like a few questions if I mind about that. Okay, so one, do you guys have consistent rhythm of what that looks like for you? And how did you arrive at that?
We kind of go back and forth on different things. The last 3 years, at the beginning of the year, we've started taking time to just get away for like a day by ourselves, just praying and seeking God's direction for the coming year. Out of those times have come like how we're going to commit our finances in the year, or how we're going to get together and pray throughout the year, different things we can study. Things like that. But otherwise, like every day, we're in the mornings. We mainly get together with it's us and the kids, but we do a family Bible study in the morning, and then at nights, Katie and I will take time to just pray on our own. We tend to utilize our car time. Some people call it windshield time, and just take time to talk then too.
We went through a similar practice this year where we sat down at the beginning of the year and just talked about what it is that we were wanting to study in the word together, and then when we were going to do it. And I would say, like, for us anyway, it's been important to be flexible enough to pivot in those seasons where like things come up, and also be a little bit sacrificial about your time. Like in this season, 6 o'clock in the morning works the very best for us to study God's word together, and that is not Ben's favorite time of the day.
No.
I understand.
So
I get you.
So he's definitely sacrificing that for us to be able to do that. But it's changed. I mean, we've had different rhythms in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I think it's important too that, if you miss a day or whatever, to not just beat yourself up, but just get back into it the next opportunity you can. But sometimes with starting those habits, it's easy to just be like, oh, we failed, I give up. But yeah, just keep persevering.
Yeah.
A friend of mine said, if you miss Bible study one day, don't miss two. If you miss it 2 days, don't miss three. You know, if you miss it 2 days, don't miss four. And you just, kept going on. He's like, just get back into it,
Yeah, not striving for perfection, but just striving for intentionality and building that relationship with Christ. You touched on conflict resolution when you were talking about premarital counseling. I want to tell a story. So when Ben and I first started premarital counseling, we were discussing, it was probably our first conflict and probably the biggest one we've had in our time together, if I was going to move to Pierre or if Ben was going to move to Rapid City. And one of the things we talked about with Pastor Tom right away was like, we really need some serious help on conflict resolution. He's like, okay. So we start telling him how we're working through this. And he kind of laughed and patted us on the back and said you're doing great. Keep going. Because what we were after was this, I don't want to be in conflict, right? Not that we were but one of the things that we learned in that situation, I think, was that I am a verbal processor. So I may not have my words exactly the way that I need them, and I might not even have my thoughts all the way fleshed out, but if you will engage with me, I will by the time we're done. And Ben's like, I need a minute to think about this. And the minute might be a few weeks or depending on, in that situation, it was a really big decision. So it took time, but that's a pretty valuable lesson to learn because there's just times in life where things come up that you don't totally see eye to eye on. What does that look like for you guys, learning how to do conflict resolution in a way that honors Christ and honors one another?
I think one thing that maybe we've had to learn is just how to listen well to each other. We just both come from different perspectives. We have different thought processes, different backgrounds. And so I might say something, but that, it gets interpreted differently. And then he might say something and I misunderstand it just because we didn't take time to understand the whole point that they were trying to make.
Sure.
I think it's, been growing process, but learned how to just listen and take time to say what we're thinking and just kind of talk through it and see what's actually true, what's just, maybe our emotions or and then, coming back to what does God want, what's truly going to honor Christ in this situation.
Yeah, part of conflict resolution is also keeping an eye on yourself. I'm very aware of my own kind of how God has grown me and matured me over the years. So when I was younger, I was very much just blab everything out at people. So if I got angry with someone or if there's conflict, at least with my siblings, if we didn't get to physical blows, boy, I could verbally just trash someone, And I did that one time. This one instance I remember distinctly that some mean words came out of my mouth towards one of my sisters, and I remember how that affected her. And so from then on, I started keeping a high watch on my words, and so really just keeping it in. So from then on, whenever I approached conflict, I try to not say something right away, so that I don't, even though I kind of am a verbal processor too, because I don't want to say something that will tear someone down, And then from there, it was a matter of, like Katie was saying, listening well and making sure you understand the other person. But then it's also just kind of recently, I've been kind of if there's something to take offense at, that doesn't mean I have to take offense at it or become angry with it. And so I ask myself, why would I be upset about this? And it usually comes down to my pride or my own selfishness. And so as I'm working to keep myself in check and just be honest before God about my own sin and things and seeking, humility, it's actually helped, I think, a lot with any conflict that we experience, that I don't elevate it or make it larger before I actually just take time to think is this something you get angry at that? No, I've done something the same or even worse. So how can we address the issue and move forward?
What do you guys think about letting your kids see you disagree about something? Is that healthy or not healthy?
At one point we joked, I don't know how many years. It was almost like we had a long honeymoon period, kind of. So for a lot of years, we didn't have a major disagreement. And the kids were young and we're like, man, we have to figure out something to argue about just so we can show the kids how to healthily argue about something. And God was like, don't worry, I'll bring some things your way.
I will answer
Yeah.
that.
I think it's healthy for kids to see conflict and conflict resolution. As long as you don't let that conflict devolve into sin, right? You can easily devolve into slander and gossip and malice and all sorts of things. And if you're doing that, it's not a matter of your kids shouldn't see that, but you also shouldn't just be doing that. You know,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I feel like I had like 3 sets of parents. They're the same parents, but 3 sets of parents. When I was really young, my parents would they would argue and they would argue loudly. And so I barely remember that. I remember enough that one of my sisters once asked them, "Why do you guys fight all the time?" And then there was this period where, I don't know, from when I was 8 probably and on, when I never saw them fight again. I knew they disagreed about things, but I never saw them fight again. And so those were the 2 examples of like conflict resolution that I had, like knockout, drag out blows, or just not at all. And then the parents I have now, they've really God has really worked in their lives so that they're completely different than what they were. And maybe that's just kind of how God has worked in their lives over time to bring them to this point. But yeah, I don't have a problem. In fact, I think it's good for kids to see conflict resolution so that they know how to be able to do that. Again, what we do informs how they will act later in life. And so we don't want them to get the thought that, man, once you're married, everything's peaches and unicorns and stuff. There's no fighting, but they should be able to see how the gospel can still work in and through that.
I think I would, agree with that, and that, I think your kids see your life, your marriage, is an example to them, like all the time, like kind of whether you're trying to or not. So yeah, just in everything, conflict resolution and talking through life, different things. You're kind of giving them an example of how to relate to other people throughout their life. So it's good to just model Christ in all that you do.
Does it like matter like what the topic's about? Because like I could see it happening where if they see you arguing about like something like related to the kid, they'll like either like inadvertently learn that like go to like dad for one thing and mom for another type thing.
Yeah. And my advice for that would be just in general anyways, yeah, be very careful on the topics you talk about right away. Kids need to, just like they need to grow in their understanding of math, right? You don't sit them down and teach them calculus right away. You start with basic numbers and things like that. So you don't want to throw them right into the middle of a pretty in-depth and complicated conflict and help them through that. So yeah, I mean, do be careful on those things as they get older, even about kids. I don't kind of have a problem with that within reason. Our oldest daughter, she wants to have a phone right now. I don't want her to have a phone yet. But at least bringing her along with, it's not really a conflict there, but bringing her along with our thought process and how we're trying to balance both of our own views on this and kind of find a middle ground and then tell her, well, this is why we're doing this. That's important too.
Yeah.
For sure. What do you feel like you know about marriage now that you didn't know before you had kids?
I would just kind of go back to that. They see everything, so how you live your life is in your marriage is an example to your kids, how you interact with people, and also just kind of reminds us too that it's that other people see your marriage too, not just your kids, but so it's an example to others, and just kind of makes you think about that a little more.
Yeah, how intentional you have to be with each other. Once kids come along, you're having a whole nother person to be responsible for. Before kids, you kind of just have your own 2 selves, and so it's easier to find times for each other. As soon as you throw in someone else who's in need of constant care and things like that, then yeah, you got to be really, really intentional. And as a pastor, I've talked to people whose kids, they just empty nesting, they just got graduated and left the house, and now they're like, who's this person that I'm married to? Because they spent the last 18 years so focused on their kids and getting them around to different things and making sure that they raised them, that they kind of neglected their own spouse. I think I read somewhere that statistically it's when the kids graduate that if divorce is going to happen, it's probably right around that time, because they're like, I don't even know this person anymore. And you change a lot, right, in 18 years. being intentional, and then just being responsible. You don't really get a sick day even when you're sick. And then you have to be like sacrificial too, because if there's times where the whole family's sick, and so you got to step up anyways and be like, okay, we're cooking food, we're getting laundry done, we're being there for each other. Everything in you wants to just be like, meet my needs or meet my wants, and the other person's like, meet my needs, meet my wants, and we're like, fine, we'll both do it together. So yeah, you have to be intentional, you have to be responsible, you have to be sacrificial. I could probably make a sermon out of that.
Yeah. You got the 3 points.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a good foundation right
yeah.
there. Okay, last big kind of bucket. What does it look like to make big life decisions together, and at steps in that process where maybe you're not totally aligned? How do you work through that? And yeah.
Just roll some dice.
Right.
I'm just playing.
Yeah, so I was thinking through one kind of bigger life decision sort of recently was when just that we moved over here to Iowa. We kind of had, an inkling of God's leading, but just praying about, where and the timing and all that. And for myself, I have a hard time with change. So it took me a while, but I think just the big thing is just to continue praying together, seeking God, and just, to see what his will is, and not only for his leading, but also to kind of work in your own heart if sometimes you might be stubbornly resisting it, but just helps you, align yourself with God's will.
Yeah, we try to make some like bigger frameworks to make bigger decisions in. And so, yeah, we uprooted from when we first got together and were married and we had 2 kids. We were living in Mankato, Minnesota. And it was a big decision to uproot and go to Johnson City, and then another big decision to uproot from there and go up to Pierre, and then now down to Iowa. One of the larger frameworks of that was, for sure that God is calling us, we're going to do it. So we need to make sure that God's calling us, Same thing with finances. We believe that God provides for us, and that we can be instrument of provision for others. And so how we structure our finances is to try to be, in line with that. So like, hey, if we think that we need a new vehicle, then the question is, how can we make that purchase, make that major decision in line with what we already affirm, both theologically and what we've talked about and things like that. And so we never make a huge decision without a larger framework in place. It's just a matter of how each of us think through that framework and how kind of God leads us through that. So like Katie said, it takes her a little bit longer to accept change. And me, I could be like, all right, we're moving tomorrow. Let's pack, let's go. And so we kind of balance each other out there. God will work through that to be like, hey, Jesse, have you considered all the implications of this decision? And so that helps me to be a little bit more careful in those major life decisions.
For me, I mean, it's taking time.
Yeah, I probably have a little bit more in line with Jesse, and that's probably a little more in line with Katie in terms of like how quickly we move.
Yeah.
But I also think one of the things that we've learned is that neither of us are, like, if we're overwhelmed, we can kind of shut down in terms of decision making. And so there's like this component of like staying the course. If we feel like God is leading, like just being willing to stay in it together and kind of just taking the next step, whatever that looks like.
And for some things, like moving from Pierre to here, that was one thing that God kind of had to smack me upside the head for. Like, my goal was to stay in Pierre until the youth that I inherited for the youth ministry in 6th grade graduated high school. And so that I left 3 years, they still hadn't, of course, graduated. That took me a long time to like accept. And God's like, no, you've got to do this. And I think God gave me that inkling. It was before COVID that God started giving me that I'm leading you away from here, because I was fighting it so long, because he knew I was going to fight it so long. Because everything that happened to get us to the church that we're at right now was just kind of everything just fell into place. They weren't looking 2-3 years ago when I started feeling that inkling. But when they were looking was when I had finally accepted that I should start looking. God was already kind of making me let go of my own plans and being like, I have different plans for you. And by the time I was starting to accept it, that's when I was like, hey, Katie, I'm thinking we're being led away from here. And that was giving her time then to start accepting it.
It's like, okay, I can like plan a really long timeline here eventually, sure, but and I'll be like, okay, maybe not that long. Let's gradually move it sooner.
Yeah, we were studying James at church, and we were just talking about a passage in James 4 where it talks about planning and just that, ultimately, like, we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, and it's foolish to like pretend like we do. So there's wisdom in, planning. Proverbs talks about that and stuff. It's not neglecting that totally, but just like holding our own plans open-handed and going, okay, God, like where you lead and what you bring to us will, be obedient. Cool. Is there any other like pieces of wisdom or advice that you want to share?
I would just say pray in everything. Like pray together, just pray. Yeah, just everything you do to seek God's will and just everything. Pray.
Yeah,
we kind of stumbled upon that because like as we're talking to God with each other, we're also growing closer in our relationship with each other. We're seeing where we're at in our faith and our theology of God. As we're like just coming together and just focusing on God, suddenly we're just seeing our own relationship and our own marriage being strengthened through that time together. So we didn't have like any deep talks. We weren't like dissecting our relationship. We were just getting together and praying to God and with each other. And that was a pretty cool thing to see. So
that's really awesome. Cool. So we ask all our guests before they go, what's been inspiring you lately?
The Osbury Revival. Have you heard about that? Okay, so there's a Osbury College. It's a Methodist college down in Kentucky, and they started a student chapel what's today? Thursday? Not yesterday, but the week before on a Wednesday, and it hasn't stopped. People have been going there from all around the country, and there's a few professors that I really respect their opinion, and one's part of my doctoral work, and he's a professor of evangelism. He's studied revivals, and like if someone knows something about revivals, it's this guy. And he went and stopped there to see like what's going on, and he's like, I really think God is just working here, and so that's exciting. Makes me want to go down there. I just don't have the time or resources right now. But then the prayer is, that God would spark revival from there throughout the nation. People are going there from around the nation, and once they start going back to where they are, so that's inspiring for me.
That's really cool.
Yeah, just reading the Bible. Just might sound like a cheesy answer, but just more time I spend with God. It's just always humbling and inspiring, and just good to just see God throughout the history of the Bible, and just see God working in life today.
I love it. Yep. Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Friends, thank you so much for listening in today. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. If you're so inclined, we would love for you to leave a review of the show wherever you listen to podcasts. This helps potential new listeners to get a feel for the show before they even hit play. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Inspiring Heights. If you haven't already, you can sign up for our newsletter, Inspiration from the Moment, by visiting our website, inspiringheights.org, and hovering over the Contact Us link. If you have friends that aren't yet subscribers, please share the podcast with them if you think it's something that would be helpful and inspiring to them. Okay, friends, until next time, take a deep breath and be inspired where your feet are. Bye for now.